You are studying 1 Peter. Once you have your spot there, go back, hold that spot, and mark John chapter 13. We're going to start there this morning. While you're turning, let me review just quickly. Week 1, we talked about we have hope in this world because of our salvation. A lot of craziness, world seems upside down, chaotic, nothing really makes sense. You kind of scratch your head and go, what did they say? What is happening? Where did that come from? And you look at that and you just think, man, I'm so thankful that my hope comes from the Lord, that I can find confidence in my salvation. Week number 2, salvation results in a desire to live holy. We had our Highlands Christian Academy Day, and I just wanted to continue through the series, and we talked about holiness. You say, preacher, that's not a good way to build a large church, but it is a great way to build the kingdom of God. To see people as followers of Jesus Christ. In 1 John, John wrote to us and said this in chapter 2 and verse 15, do not love the world or the things that are in the world, because if anyone loves the world, the love of the Father is not in him. And yet we see a generation of those who call themselves Christian and yet are lovers of the world. And in other passages it says, listen, you're adulterers or adulteresses. And he's saying basically spiritual adultery, because we want to have a relationship with Jesus, but we also want to have a relationship with the things of the world. And he says you can't have Jesus and a worldly mistress on the side. You got to be committed, fully devoted followers of Jesus Christ. Well, last week, Gary Lowy preached, because obviously we had our group there in Israel, and so blessed to have our pastoral team there. Man, it was incredible. Could not have ever imagined that would happen, but it was such a blessing. So today we're going to pick back up 1 Peter, and we're talking about living in harmony. 1 Peter chapter 1, but let's start in John chapter 13. So let me give you a little introduction here. Multiple sources will cite a story about Andrew Jackson, and it really leads well into today's message. Let me read it to you. Before Andrew Jackson became president, he served as a major general in the Tennessee militia. It's said that during the War of 1812 that his troops were fussing and fighting among themselves. It's reported that Jackson called them all together on one occasion and he said, gentlemen, let's remember the enemies over there. It's a great statement. In today's world, what do we see in the church? People sitting on this side because you don't get along with people on this side, or people sitting over here because you don't get along with people over here, or people that left the church because somebody treated them one way or the other, and people that argue back and forth because this one likes this and this one doesn't. And you say, wait a minute, the enemy is not within the church, nor is the enemy the church down the street. We realize that, right? We're not in competition with other churches in our community. We're on the same team. They're not the enemy. And so often we forget that. One of the things that was such a great lesson, and so many in our group caught it at the same time, we were driving through Bethlehem on our trip, and our guide was a Christian, and he was talking about how that as we went through the area where he lived, he said, you don't talk bad about the other groups in this city, the other Christian groups. The Catholic priest will defend the Lutheran group. The Lutheran group will defend the Methodist group and all of that. He said, because we're Christians, and we're very few in this nation. Where it's primarily Jews and Muslims, the Christian group is a small and shrinking minority, and he says, we don't fight against one another. We're for each other, although we have a few differences along the way. And it's a great lead-in to today, because we say we love God, and that's easy. But to love his people sometimes is not as easy, right? So as we think about that this morning, Jesus is very clear in the Bible. He talks about the marks of a Christian. They're unity, love, and harmony. That's the way the church should look, not the bickering and infighting. I remember being in the last church that I pastored, and you'd go and you'd have breakfast, and there'd be a bunch of men around the table. We'd just kind of meet at one of the local restaurants, and as they're sitting around the table, they're kind of talking about what happened at church yesterday, or the problems that are going on in this church, the problems that are going on there, how that this happened. And you have to pause for a minute and say, wait a minute. When the church is the negative conversation in the community, something's not right. We ought to be the place that people come for healing, not the place that tears folks apart. And Jesus addresses this, and Peter addresses this. And so I want to start with Jesus there in John chapter 13. It's what's called the Upper Room Discourse. And as we look at this, point number one, if you're following along in the outline, is the word unity. Unity. And there's an example that's shown to us. Jesus gives us the illustration here. John chapter 13, if you're there, look at verse 12. So when he, Jesus, had washed their feet, taken his garments, and sat down again, he said to them, do you know what I have done to you? You call me teacher and Lord, and you say, well, for so I am. And at this point, you can just imagine that the disciples expected that Jesus would say, hey, what I just did for you, now I want you to do for me. I mean, it would make sense. Their feet are clean. They had traveled the dusty roads. They're obviously wearing sandals back in that day. The dirt had come. And so the host would wash the feet. Usually the servants would wash the feet. But in this case, Jesus, the host, takes on the role of a servant. We call it in this passage the power of the towel. He took that towel and girded himself, and he knelt down and he began to wash their feet. And you could just see them around the room. You could almost expect it. They're going, all right, so you're about to tell us that we now need to wash your feet. But he didn't. Look at verse 14. If then your Lord and teacher has washed your feet, you also ought to wash one another's feet. For I've given you an example that you should do as I have done to you. So as he stops there, what he's saying is this is the humility that comes. This is the humility that's necessary to find unity in the family. Serving one another. Not serving just because someone did something for us, but we should be doing this for others and exercising this humility. I don't know if you've ever been involved in a foot washing ceremony or act. If you have, you know how humbling that is. Now you say, preach, we're not one of those denominations that does that kind of stuff. Well, I was in a church that was exactly the same denomination, and we did that in a men's group. We were on a men's retreat. And the leaders of the church, we knelt down and washed someone else's feet. Now let me tell you something. You talk about uncomfortable. That's really weird. It's uncomfortable. But the idea is not to say, hey, this is great. Yeah, you missed a spot. The idea is to bring us to the point of humility, or to begin to show that servant spirit in washing one another's feet. And as you look at the example set by Jesus, if there's going to be unity in the church, it starts with humility. It starts with serving one another. So those that are leaders are servants. We have to be reminded of that we have the privilege of serving this church family as pastors and deacons and those that are on other committees. We're not entitled to a position. Churches get in trouble when the pastor believes that the church belongs to him, or the deacons believe that I've been here so long that I'm in charge. And the reality is that no, diakonos means one who serves. Pastors are serving the church family. When we forget that, we're in trouble. So Jesus gives us an example, and it goes on, and he gives us a command. There's a command given. Look at John chapter 13. Keep moving down. Look at verse 35. After this example that he has shown in this upper room discourse and the level of humility, he gives a new commandment. I give to you that you love one another as I have loved you, that you also have love for one another. Because by this love, we'll all know that you're my disciples if you have love one for another. I love that passage. Because in the church family, we set our own level of spirituality. By this will all men know you're my disciples, if you memorize a passage of Scripture. By this will all men know you're my disciples, if you don't do these things on this list. By this shall all men know you're my disciples, if you come to every service, every time the doors are open, and you tithe a certain amount, and you... See, we make this big list. That's church tradition. Jesus said, it's by this that all will know you're my disciples, not the list we put together, but if you have love one for another. And so often we can do all the other things without any love. We can go through the list and check it off without any love whatsoever. The missing element in so many churches today is love. Why do you see so many church splits? Why do you see so many church arguments? Why do you see people gossiping about one another or running people down? It's because we're missing the element of love. Instead, in Proverbs, it says that hatred stirs up strife, but love covers all sins. The missing element is love. Proverbs 17, verse 9, he who covers a transgression seeks love, but he who repeats a matter separates friends. Are you a gossip? Are you involved in? Let me tell you this. Did you hear about this? Let's pray for this one. When we repeat the problem, we're separating folks. When we cover the matter, that's love. That's what it's talking about here. So which do you see more of in churches today? I mean, think about it for a minute. Do you see more forgiveness and refusal to bring up an issue, or do you see more gossip and refusal to let it go? That's where the problem lies. So Jesus says, hey, I'm going to give you the example of humility. And what I do for you, you go and do for others. He says, I'm going to give you a new command. Love one another. Because that's how everybody's going to know you're one of my disciples. And then he gives us the purpose. He explains the purpose to us. Turn over to John chapter 17, just a few chapters later. The priestly prayer here, you see it, and I'm going to read it out of the NIV. It says this, John 17, beginning in verse 21, that all of them may be one. Father, just as you are in me and I am in you, may they also be in us, so that the world may believe that you have sent me. There's the purpose. May they have unity and be as one, so that the world may believe that you've sent me. Verse 22, I've given them the glory that you gave me, that they may be one as we are one. I in them and you in me, so that they may be brought to complete unity. Then the world will know that you sent me and have loved them even as you have loved me. Man, that was his prayer. And I preached on this a while back, so I'm not going to go into this deep today. But when we love that way, when we have that kind of unity, that was what Jesus was praying for in the church. That's what he wanted us to have. So why is it that so many who claim to follow Christ are bitter? I would say haters versus lovers, maybe even gossips, refusing to forgive. Why would people want to have what we have when we exhibit that in a church family? In fact, the world, if you ask them, they'll say we're judgmental, that we're a bunch of hypocrites, that, you know, they can name everything we're against. But wouldn't it be great if they said, man, those people can love you? No matter what's going on in your life, those people will love you. They will help you through. They'll accept you where you are, and they will love you to where you need to be in Jesus Christ. Wouldn't that be a great thing to happen? That's the purpose. He wants us to have unity. He wants us to have harmony in the body so that those on the outside that don't know Christ would come to know him. That's the purpose. And then he gives the instructions. The Apostle Paul says it so well over in Philippians chapter 2, verses 3 and 4. Let nothing be done through selfish ambition or conceit. He says, don't do it for yourself, but in lowliness of mind. That goes back to John 13, the power of the towel. In lowliness of mind, let each esteem others better than himself. Let each of you look not only for his own interests, but also for the interests of others. He says, listen, when there's going to be unity in the body, it comes with loving each other. It starts with humility. So then he tells us, not only do we start out with this idea of unity, but it's followed up with love, is point number 2, if you're following along. Love. So we understand these teachings of Jesus in the upper room discourse. Now we're going to shift over to Peter. 1 Peter. Now remember, Peter's addressing the believers who were scattered. 1 Peter chapter 1 and verse 1, we went through that. They were going through a variety of trials in verse 6. They're undoubtedly being tempted to conform, to compromise, to just give up. They're frustrated. So Peter writes this letter, and he sends it to them, and he wants to encourage them. So we just looked at John 13. We looked at Jesus' example and what he said about unity, and then we see what Peter says. Understanding that premise and building upon it, he says, hey, you guys got to pull together. Instead of finding fault and driving wedges, let's put on Band-Aids and bandages, and let's bring this thing back together. Let's heal the body rather than destroy the body. And so he says, listen, you guys, when you pull together, we're going to support one another. We're going to encourage one another. We're going to love one another with brotherly love, the Bible talks about. So what are the prerequisites to love? He gives us several here. And if we're going to do this, 1 Peter chapter 1, look at verse 22. It says, since you have purified your souls in obeying the truth through the Spirit in sincere love of the brethren. And he lays it out right there. He says, number one, here's the prerequisite, purity of soul. Purity of soul. There can't be any prejudice. There can't be any resentment. There can't be any grudges. There can't be any bitterness. There can't be any envy. There has to be a real, true introspection. Am I real? Am I authentic? People say, how would you describe this church? I said, my prayer is this, that people would see a group and a body of believers that are authentic, that we're real, we're genuine, and when people see us, it's not a bunch of made-up hypocrisy or anything. It's just real. It's genuine, that when they look at us, they see people who just love Jesus and want to love those that he created. So, purity of soul, no prejudice, no resentment, no grudges, bitterness. There's got to be forgiveness. There's got to be repentance when we've done wrong. And then there's restoration, bringing the body back together. But a purity of soul that wants the best for everybody, that doesn't have a hierarchy or a ranking in the church, but has a genuine love for one another in the church family. The second thing is obedience to the truth, living out godly principles. This morning in our foundations class, we talked about baptism. It's the first step. I mean, if you believe in Jesus, don't wait. We gave illustration after illustration after illustration after illustration. And the same day they believed and were baptized. If you believe, you may. There's water, let's go. It was immediate. People didn't wait. Today we say, well, when it's convenient, when you have time, I want you to think about it. It's like, what kind of foolish nonsense is that? You believe, let's go. If you're ashamed, it's kind of like getting married and saying, well, I'm married, but I just don't want to do the ring thing. How's that going to go over? I want to marry you, but I just don't want people to know we're married. Go home and have that conversation with your spouse. Yeah, I'm going to quit wearing my ring. I just don't know if I want people to know we're married. It's the same thing with baptism. You say, well, preacher, I'm afraid of crowds. Okay. We'll work with you. But I don't want to get my hair wet. I'm afraid of the water. I've heard almost every excuse you can give. And I saw a video yesterday. I sent it to Pastor Robert. I don't know if he saw it or not, but a guy that started to baptize, and John Peake sent it to me. And man, the pastor was on top of him, pushing him down. Don't make me come to that point to jump on top and push you down. If you haven't been baptized, my appeal to you this morning is, what in the world are you waiting for? Do you love Jesus or don't you? Did you make the commitment or didn't you? That's the first step, obedience to the truth. If you're a follower of Jesus Christ and you see something in Scripture that says this is the next step, don't say, how can I get around it? Say, let's go, let's do it. The next one, sincerity and maybe a lack of hypocrisy. Wouldn't the world welcome that if the church would look at not what's in it for me, but what can I do for you? I tell you, I'm just one of those guys. I watch modern preachers and everybody building their brand and putting their name on everything, and they've got to have this ministry with this name. It's like, where's Jesus in all this? How do we get to the point that the preacher owns the church and, the preacher's name is there? It's like, man, where's Jesus? How did we get so far off? If we're going to have these prerequisites to love in our life, we got to remember what it's all about. The power of the towel, that upper room discourse, serving one another. Then not only are the prerequisites, but we're told, Peter tells us to love as God loves. Love as God loves. Look at the second part of verse 22. Love one another fervently with a pure heart. He talks about philos love, brotherly love, the fondness, the affection. He talks about agape love. This is really where we're supposed to be, divine love, that deep, unselfish love. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son. He didn't say God so loved the world that he said, come do something for me. Jesus said the Son of Man came to serve, not to be served. And again, we forget that. These prerequisites are humility, sincerity, all of these things that we saw in the upper room discourse, and Peter saying, build on that, here it is. The next thing, harmony. Unity, love, and the key word, harmony. It's a result of a unified body. When there's unity in the body, when there's love in the body, they're going to exhibit this agape love for one another, and there's going to be harmony. And Peter, again, he gives 4 reasons that believers should exhibit this harmony. Look what he says. The first one, our family is a big reason. Our family, this family. We're traveling to Israel. We felt like a family. Everybody's looking out for one another. Somebody has a need, here it is. Somebody forgot this, you can borrow it. Somebody's sick, hey, I got the medicine. You cut yourself? I'm not sure my Band-Aid's not. No, somebody said, I got one. It's a family meeting the needs of others, and here it is, our family. Look at this, 1 Peter chapter 1, look at verse 23, the first part. Having been born again. If you've been born again, you're part of the family. You are part of God's family. And for the sake of God's family, we should exhibit harmony amongst ourselves. We've got the same Father in God. We're members of one another. 1 Corinthians chapter 12 talks about that. We function better when we're working together. If you have some sort of illness that you can't control a word, you know how embarrassing that can be. If you've got a problem where you don't hear well, you understand how frustrating that can be. If you're unable to walk right, you understand. When these things afflict the body, man, it's a struggle. The body is our family, this family. Sometimes we forget that. And we're a family. Thick and thin, good and bad, celebrating the victories, weeping during the difficulties, mourning with those who mourn. The Bible describes all of that, and we have that opportunity. And here it is, Peter saying, hey, for the sake of your family, those of you that have been born again, that are part of God's family, that are part of the local church family, there should be harmony just because we're brothers and sisters in Jesus Christ. And he gives the instructions. And he says all believers are supposed to get our instructions from the same source, the Bible, not public opinion. I know public opinion changes, but look what Peter says. Drop down to verse 23, the second part. He says, through the word of God, which lives and abides forever. Because all flesh is as grass, and all the glory of man is the flower of the grass. The grass withers, the flower falls away, but the word of the Lord endures forever. Now this is the word which by the gospel was preached to you. Not public opinion, it changes. Not personal ideas, they differ. The precepts of Scripture, doctrine, a firm foundation that's not easily shaken, that's not tossed about by the wind, that doesn't matter what's the trendy or modern theology, that we go back and say, what does the Bible say? You know, that's one of our core values. The Bible is our final authority. That's what we believe. So we're not going to go with what's trendy. We're going to go with what does God say? What is in his word? And he goes on and he says, here's another reason. Because of our struggles. 1 Peter chapter 2. Turn over there and look at verse 1. He said, because of these struggles, therefore lay aside all malice, all deceit, all hypocrisy, envy, and all evil speaking. For this reason, hey, we're a family, we're a body, there should be unity, there should be harmony, others are watching us. The purpose is so that those without Christ will one day come to see him, but these struggles are going to get in the way, and so we should have harmony in the body to help us through this. And he names these things. There's going to be malice, there's going to be evil actions toward one another. Knock it off. He says, stop that. It's like Bob Newhart in the old, if you remember when the guy comes in for counseling and he says, well, stop. Just stop it. That's it. That's the one. Stop it. Stop it. Imagine if the world, when faced with some of these things, we just as Christians look back and somebody comes to gossip in our ear and we just look at him and go, stop it. Stop it. What are you doing? You're polluting my mind. Stop it. Don't do evil toward those in the body, the family. If you're a parent and one child hits another child, It doesn't usually end well, does it? If they mistreat a sibling, there's a problem. And parents step in. God steps in to stop these quarrels with his children. Deceit. Stop misleading people in the family by lies. Hypocrisy, he says, saying one thing, doing another. Don't do that. Be authentic. Envy, hidden resentment, or desiring somebody else has a blessing happen, and you go, why didn't I get that? Why didn't they ask me? Why didn't I get it? Knock it off. Stop it. Stop it. Evil speaking. He even addresses that one. And I love how the Apostle Paul would always put those in. And anything else. You know, what can separate us from the love of God? And he goes through the list. Nor any other, just in case I missed something. And here Peter says, evil speaking. What's that? Gossip, rumor spreading, slander, seeking to harm someone's reputation. He says, okay, all these other things. But if you're talking bad about somebody, stop it. He's just saying that's not how we act in the family. And then he says, why? Because this is our goal. Look at our goal. 1 Peter chapter 2 and verse 2. That as newborn babes, we would desire the pure or sincere milk of the word that we may grow thereby. That in the family, our goal would be to be more like Christ. More of the word, more of the word, more of the word, more of the word, more of the word. Not that we would argue, not that we would fuss, not that we would fight, not that we would criticize, not that we would gossip, not that we would slander, but that we would talk about the word. More of the word, more of the word, more of the word, more of the word. Do you have a sweet tooth, anybody? If we fixed you a small bowl of ice cream, your favorite flavor, whatever it might be, and you got to the end of that small bowl, what do you want? More. Reg, I know you love ice cream. You want more. And we give you just a little bit more. What do you want? More. And you get to the end of that, what do you want? Just a little bit more. When it comes to the word, we ought to want a little bit more and a little bit more and a little bit more. You know what we do? Oh, read my daily bread for today. Done for the day. It should be, man, that should make us want more. It's kind of like the folks that went to Israel with us. I was telling them this. You know what that journey did? It should stoke a desire to want to know more. And that's what he's saying here. That's the goal. The goal in the upper room discourse and the high priestly prayer, so that others may know Christ, that we would be humble and serve so that others may know. Peter says the goal in all of this, treating one another with love and unity and harmony in the body, is so that we would want more of Jesus Christ, more of his word, to be more like him, to show more of him to others, that the world out there might want more of what's in here because of the way that we treat one another. They say, man, nobody treats me that good. Nobody loves me, warts and all. Why did they do that for each other? Because of Jesus Christ and him alone. So let me wrap this up. Psalm 133 is probably one of the best for this. Listen, behold how good and how pleasant it is for brethren to dwell together in what? Unity. It is like the precious oil upon the head, running down on the beard of Aaron, running down on the edge of his garments. It's like the dew of Hermon descending upon the mountains of Zion. For there the Lord commanded the blessing, life forevermore. When Christians are obeying the word and living in unity and practicing love, man, there's going to be harmony in the church. So how do we tie it all up? How do we ask you to respond to Peter's writing on that? It's really easy. Who do you have something against right now? Who is it that you're struggling with? Maybe somebody's offended you. Maybe there's a problem. You've just kind of done battle. They said something that bothered you, and they don't even know. You're just carrying the grudge. That's why, the Bible says that if a brother offends you, go to that one, because sometimes people say something and don't even know you're offended. You're upset and carrying it around. They don't even know you're bothered by it. You're angry, and they're having a great time in life because they don't even know. Who do you need to go talk to? Who do you need to go make something right with? Is it someone in the church? Is it someone in your family? But that's what you do with this. You say, hey, unity, love, harmony. If there's something not quite right, I need to do something about it. And if you're thinking through that and you say, no, I think everything's good. Man, what a blessing. Thank God. But if not, would you take a moment and pray and say, Lord, with your help, we're going to make this right. We're going to build that bridge. We're going to mend the fences here. Maybe you're one that you've never really made it right with God just yet. That's a big question people ask. How can I be right with God? What do I have to do to be right with God? It's the same thing. Realize that our sin offends him. Reach out and confess the sin and invite him to be your Savior. He made the way. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son. And if that's you, I invite you after the service. I'm going to be out in the lobby. I love standing out there and just having the opportunity to talk with you. Find me. Find Pastor Robert. You saw him up here leading and baptizing this morning. We have other pastors in our room here. We've got deacons that are here. If you see that, you say, you know what, I just want to make sure I'm right with God this morning. On your way out, you ask somebody. Have them take a moment and just share with you what it means to be right with God. The unity, the love, and the harmony. Wouldn't that be a great thing for a church to be known for, those three things? That's what God wants. That's what we see in his prayers. And Peter said, I'm writing to you, church, that's struggling, that's scattered, that's suffering. You need some encouragement. Remember, like Andrew Jackson said, we're not the enemy. The enemy's over there. Satan's the enemy. And he is seeking whom he may devour. We need to remember that we are working together, that we're part of the same team, that we're the family of God. Let's pray together. God, we read this passage, and it's amazing. We see the upper room discourse, we see the high priestly prayer, we hear Peter reiterating some of these things, and it seems as though the theme in the New Testament, even the Apostle Paul out of 1 Corinthians chapter 12, and then 13, the love chapter, they're saying we can have all the gifts, we can look sharp, we can have it all going on, but if we don't have love, we're nothing. And we see that theme through the New Testament. We see the purpose being that others would look at us and say they're different. We want what they have, and that thing that brings us together is Jesus Christ, the person of Christ, the gift of salvation that transforms us from the inside out. And so, God, in all of that, today, my prayer is that we would realize that we're not fighting against each other. We're not fighting against other churches. We're not fighting these things. We're missing the mark. The enemy is Satan, the prince of this world, the lion that's seeking whom he may devour. Help us to identify the true enemy, the one that wants to destroy our marriages and our families and our homes and our testimonies, and help us to realize that we're to encourage one another, support one another, edify one another. And God, use these passages today to help us to understand how important harmony in the body is to you. For those that don't know Christ and have never made peace with you, that have never experienced the forgiveness that comes through salvation, Lord, I pray today would be that day that they would experience that as well. In Jesus' name, amen.